Happy Wednesday, Pre-K. Today we're going to read some more Charlotte's Web. Wilbur is here. We're ready to go. So, listening ears, I hope you're enjoying this story as much as I am. And remember, we're really more than halfway. You only have, about 80 pages and we're there. And then we get the prize. And if we're not back at school yet, I will save everyone's prize and you'll have something to look forward to when you get back to school. So this chapter is called Dr. Dorian. When we stopped yesterday, Charlotte was singing Wilbur to sleep. She had written a new word in the web. It was terrific. Everybody thought Wilbur was terrific. Things are starting to look good. But in the middle of all this is Fern. And so we're going to find out a little bit about Fern's family today. The next day was Saturday. Fern stood at the kitchen sink, drying the breakfast dishes as her mother washed them. Mrs. Arble worked silently. She hoped Fern would go out and play with other children instead of heading for the Zuckerman's barn to sit and watch animals. Charlotte is the best storyteller I ever heard, said Fern, poking her dish towel into a cereal bowl. Fern, said her mother sternly, you must not invent things. You know spiders don't tell stories. Spiders can't talk. Charlotte can, replied Fern. She doesn't talk very loud, but she talks. What kind of story did she tell? Asked Mrs. Arable. Well, said Fern, she told us about a cousin of hers who caught a fish in her web. Don't you think that's fascinating? Fern, dear, how would a fish get into a spider's web, said Mrs. Arable. You know it couldn't happen. You're making this up. Oh, it happened all right, said Fern. Charlotte never fibs. This cousin of hers built a web across the stream, and one day she was hanging around on her web, and a tiny fish leapt in the air and got tangled in the web. Can't you just see the web sagging under the weight of the fish? Charlotte's cousin kept slipping in and out and dodging, and she was beaten mercilessly over the head by the fish's tail. But she danced in and out. Fern, snapped her mother, stop it. Stop inventing these wild tales. I'm not inventing, said Fern. I'm just telling you the facts. What finally happened, asked her mother, whose curiosity began to get the better of her. Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up and she ate him when she was good and ready. Spiders have to eat the same as the rest of us. Yes, I suppose they do, said Mrs. Arable vaguely. Charlotte has another cousin who's a balloonist. She stands on her head and lets out a lot of line and is carried aloft in the wind. Oh, Mother, wouldn't you simply love to do that? Yes, I would, come to think of it, replied Mrs. Arable. But Fern, darling, I wish you'd play outdoors today instead of going to Uncle Homer's barn. Find some of your playmates and do something nice outdoors. You're spending too much time in that barn. It isn't good for you to be alone so much. Alone, said Fern. Alone? My best friends are in that barn cellar. It's a very sociable place. Not at all lonely. Fern disappeared after a while, walking down the road toward Zuckerman's. Her mother dusted the sitting room, and as she worked, she kept thinking about Fern. It didn't seem natural for a little girl to be so interested in animals. Finally, Mrs. Arable made up her mind she would pay a call on old Dr. Dorian and ask his advice. She got in the car and she drove to his office. Dr. Dorian had a thick beard. He was glad to see Mrs. Arable, and he gave her a comfortable chair. It's about Fern, she said. Fern spends entirely too much time in Zuckerman's barn. It doesn't seem normal. She sits on a stool in the corner of the barn near the pig pen and watches animals, hour after hour. She just sits and listens. Dr. Dorian leaned back, closed his eyes. How enchanting, he said. Must be really nice and quiet down there. Homer has some sheep, hasn't he? Yes, said Mrs. Arable, but it all started with that pig. We let Fern raise it on a bottle. She calls him Wilbur. Homer bought the pig, and ever since it left our place, Fern's been going to her uncle's to be near it. I've been hearing things about that pig, said Dr. Dorian, opening his eyes. They say he's quite a pig. Have you heard about the words that appeared in the spider's web? Mrs. Arable said nervously. Yes, replied the doctor. Well, do you understand it? Asked Mrs. Arable. Understand what? Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web? Oh, no, said Dr. Dorian, I don't understand it, but for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle. But nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. What's miraculous about a spider's web, said Mrs. Arable. I don't see why you say a web is a miracle. It's just a web. Ever try to spin one? Spin one, said Dr. Dorian. Mrs. Arable shifted uneasily in her chair. No, but I can crochet a doily and I can knit a sock. Sure, said the doctor, but somebody taught you, didn't they? Here's Fern's mother, and here's Dr. Dorian with his nice big beard, leaning back in his chair, considering all these things. I think I like Dr. Dorian. Do you like him? My mother taught me. Well, who taught a spider? A young spider knows how to spin a web without any instructions from anybody. Don't you regard that as a miracle? I suppose so, said Mrs. Arable. I never looked at it that way before. Still, I don't understand how those words got in that web. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I can't understand. It's a very good point. We should never be angry or worried about something we don't understand. Given enough time, we'll either just accept it or we'll learn about it. None of us do, said Dr. Dorian. I'm a doctor. Doctors are supposed to understand everything. But I don't understand everything, and I don't intend to let it worry me. As Miss Arable fidgeted, Fern says the animals talk to each other, Dr. Dorian. Do you believe animals talk? Well, I never heard one say anything, he said, but that doesn't prove anything. It's quite possible that an animal has spoken civilly to me and that I didn't catch the remark because I wasn't paying attention. Children pay better attention than grown-ups. If Fern says that the animals in Zuckerman's barn talk, I'm quite ready to believe her. Perhaps if people talked less, animals would talk more. People are incessant talkers. I can give you my word on that. Well, I feel better about Fern, said Mrs. Arable. You don't think I need to worry about her? Does she look well? Asked the doctor. Oh, yes. Appetite good? Oh, yes, she's always hungry. Sleep well at night? Oh, yes. Then don't worry, said the doctor. Do you think she'll ever start thinking about something else besides pigs, sheep, geese, and spiders? How old is Fern? She's 8. Well, said Dr. Dorian, I think she will always love animals, but I doubt that she spends her entire life in Homer Zuckerman's barn cellar. How about boys? Does she know any boys? Well, she knows Henry Fussy, said Mrs. Arable brightly. And Dr. Dorian closed his eyes again and went into deep thought. Henry, he mumbled. Remarkable. Well, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Let Fern associate with her friends in the barn if she wants to. I would say offhand that spiders and pigs are fully as interesting as Henry Fussy. Yet, I predict that one day will come when even Henry will drop some chance remark that catches Fern's attention. It's amazing how children change from year to year. How's Avery? He asked, opening his eyes wide. Oh, Avery, chuckled Mrs. Arable. Avery is always fine, of course. He gets into poison ivy and he gets stung by wasps and bees. He brings frogs and snakes home and he breaks things he lays his hands on. He's fine. Good, said the doctor. Mrs. Arable said goodbye. and she thanked Dr. Dorian very much for his advice. She felt greatly relieved. That's the end of our chapter. Our next chapter will be called The Crickets. I have no idea about crickets, except that I know I like them and I love the sound that they make. So we're going to learn a little bit more about all the animals and things at the barn tomorrow. So, Wilbur and I hope you have a great Wednesday, and we miss you. Bye.